I'm Arthur Gaudette. In over 54 years in the industry, I came up through the ranks from bus cleaner, operator, ultimately becoming general manager. As a consultant for the last several decades, I've specialized in scheduling from an operations and management perspective. I've written 2 books, Improving On-Time Performance in the Transit Industry and Managing the Scheduling Function. The second book is aimed at senior transit executives to help them understand scheduling and get the best out of those skilled folks we call schedulers. I've also had over 1,000 transit professionals take my 2-day scheduling course, the Run Cutter course. Finally, I also offer a couple of workshops. The On-Time Performance Workshop, which was the genesis of this presentation, and a half-day operator retention and recruitment workshop. For information on any of the books, training, or workshops, please see my contact information at the end of this presentation. So, qualifications having been established, this presentation is an excerpt from the full-day on-time performance workshop, but it has been expanded to focus on what I think is the biggest issue in OTP, running early. Here's where we're going. We're going to look at ways to identify the real issue, ways to diagnose the causes, and then thoughts on how we can address those issues appropriately. When we're called on to report metrics, it's very easy to focus them only as numbers. Did we do better or worse this month, this year? That applies to school from first grade on. What is our grade? What is our score? Financially, are we better off or worse off? It can be a little more difficult to be mindful of what the numbers mean. Here, running early means we have missed passengers. It's not just a number. We can calculate how ridership changes with cost, with frequency. Known as elasticity, there are formulas as shown. But let's consider that reliability is also a determinant of people's choice, whether people ride, even though I don't know of any formulas that let us calculate this. As an aside, I wonder if that would be a good TCRP research project. Here's a study I found. Of course, over the course of time, there's a lot more than reliability that goes into customer satisfaction. But here we do see a rough correlation between punctuality, OTP, and customer satisfaction. There are 2 standards I've seen most often. As a bus driver in the 1970s, we weren't called operators then, I always kept my watch set 1 minute late. Even then, I knew that running early was not good. Let's pose a question, though, about the 1 minute early allowance used on many systems. Is it only a statistical measure to offset data collection issues like ping rates and geolocation? Or can operators use that as an allowance, as a license to run early? After our coming discussion of passenger activities, if your system does use the early allowance, may you want to revisit your policy. Yes, I have an opinion. A bus 10 seconds early is early, just as an operator who reports to work 1 second late has a miss out. But we also need to consider the potential inaccuracies of automation data collection. In the folk song, The Rock Island Line, townspeople applaud the engineer for arriving right on time. His response is that we're right on time, but this is yesterday's train. I've spent quite a bit of time over the years becoming quite familiar with a 6-route, about 70 bus system that only tells the public they will see a bus every 10 minutes. A bus, not the bus. Spacing, or headway, is what is really critical to the passengers. That said, formal schedules are needed for operator work shifts. So a problem arises. Under one scenario, looking internally at that schedule, If every bus is 10 minutes late, on-time performance is 0. To the passenger, however, on-time performance is 100%. Time costs. A washed pot never boils. I waited in line at the grocery store for 10 minutes. Yeah, it was really only 2 or 3. Studies show that this holds true for bus passengers waiting for the bus. Yes, cell phone applications that tell us where the bus actually is, with time predictability, remove some of the uncertainty. Knowing is better than guessing. For this discussion, though, we're considering the passengers who didn't board the bus they intended to because it missed them by running early. Now they have to wait for the next bus. I don't know of any studies that consider whether aggravation, worry, fear make that time perception even longer. I suspect it does. Some of the slides you'll see in this show provide reference to existing studies which may be helpful. In this case, I'm referencing the Center for Urban Transit Research's Journal of Public Transportation. Other referenced studies will be cited earlier, so you can read each entire study as you wish, as it's applicable to you. Here are some examples of the human cost when the passenger didn't miss the bus missed the passenger. Back to the difference between frequent service, headways under 12 minutes, and longer headways. Recently, I was in a parking lot and happened to be watching a bus stop while I waited for somebody. A bus headed northbound dropped off a passenger and continued on. Within a very few minutes, 2 passengers arrived individually at the stop, one in a wheelchair. Coupled with the fact that service was on a 40-minute headway, and the location was fairly close to a downstream mid-route transit center, I suspect it's a pretty good bet that the bus was running early. Here, I did not hear the first statement that was allegedly made. It was reported to me. If it was made, I don't know what was actually said or the context. For all I know, if it indeed was said, it could have been in the line of, "Don't do that." But look at the second statement made by operators. Reason or excuse, I don't know. I've never visited that specific system. However, maybe the dog really did eat my homework. In my full on-time performance workshop, we discuss ways to increase velocity, which does consider the passengers already on board. It's easy to develop that mindset, serving the people who are already on the bus, especially for an operator who must wait for the scheduled departure time at a time point, with passengers staring daggers into the back of his or her head. The observation of the missed passengers took place about 2 miles north of the upstream time point. I wasn't there on transit business, so I didn't note the time nor refer to a schedule. It's also likely the arriving passengers were so used to that route running late, they had factored that in. Perhaps the bus was actually on time. That said, it's important to note that passengers are smart, and they will figure out how to minimize their valuable time at the bus stop, whether or not it's a time point. I wonder if some kind of analysis of pass-up complaints may tell a partial story about whether the issue was the passenger not being at the stop, or in view, or the bus was early. Next, we're going to look at real data and analysis over many months. I made it anonymous by changing route numbers to letters. Overall, they're great at 91.1% average. Many systems I visit now would love to get up into the 90s. Route R is wonderful at 96.7 with 0 earlies. Route L, although better than the system average at 91.2%, had 5.9% earlies. Lates were only 2.9%. As a passenger, which of these two routes would you be more likely to ride for service and consistency? Before getting into the causes of earlies, we should probably look at cause 0. On the street, there is not a problem. The problem is in our data. Moving into a discussion of overall OTP for a minute, perhaps we should not think about using data when outside influences, weather, fires, disaster, make it impossible. Noted that in many of these situations, running early isn't a problem. My familiarity with running in blizzards, sometimes running at all, is the question. Back to the issue of earlies, I've also seen systems who operate some form of commuter service. Of course, public timetables should show scheduled AM arrivals downtown, often at multiple time points before the actual end of the line, so passengers know what bus to arrive on time. Think of the passenger going to work. If the bus is early and is only dropping off passengers, they thank the operator. They have time to walk, not run to work, maybe time to stop for coffee. But our computer may penalize the operator and the system itself for the bus having passed those near EOL time points early. Of course, we should not penalize ourselves for arriving at the end of the line early. Our concern is departures, not arrivals. By the way, the reverse occurs in the evening on the way home. When we get people home early at night, they are happy. Years ago, I was on a flight from Dallas to Chicago. The pilot announced a 2-hour flight time. We got there in less than 2 hours. I did not ask the pilot to circle around for 15 minutes. I was pleased we arrived early. I had more connecting time. So let's think about what we're thinking about. Dig deeper to see if there really is an issue. Are our numbers right on the street? Here are some considerations. Is the geolocation accurate? Are we polling the vehicles at a reasonable interval? Digging deeper into possible causes, almost every schedule change or bid period has somehow a bit of a rough start. My wife and I have volunteered for years as judges at a transit system rodeo. This year, several operators did not understand the final obstacle, the judgment stop. Some passed it entirely, some overran the cone, not realizing it was an obstacle. Further discussion revealed that although they had practiced at least once, they were brand new operators. 2, there can be bad apples at any level of seniority. So perhaps an initial decision point is to see if a handful of people are making us think that there is a problem, when perhaps it goes no deeper than education and supervision. A quick recap. But here we also need to look toward what happens on the street. The street, and only the street, tells the accurate tale as it affects passengers. As part of my OTP workshop, after hearing from multiple systems that merely report numbers, perhaps without really considering them, I posed the thought that a formal policy that formally excludes force majeure events, those beyond our control, that such a policy may make sense. I listened to one report to a system board where the executive cited the prior month's on-time performance, which was down from previous months. The executive followed the report with a statement, well, the numbers were down because of the hurricane and aftermath. In my view, those numbers should have been discounted in the first place. You'll want to develop your own process if you don't already have one. Again, think about what we're thinking about. This may be a suggestion to help you get going. We're going to revisit this later. We'll again step aside from our current focus on earlies to think about 5 essentials for OTP. Some of them will return as we get back to this topic's focus. Capital needs, buses, human needs, sufficient operators are overall factors, but have little or no effect on earlies. The other elements do. So here are the 5 musts. These are the 5 things I think we need. We're going to discuss 3 of them as I just mentioned. Let's get into some detail. I've grouped some of the causes, remembering what we discarded in cause 0, so that we can look in greater detail at cause and possible solutions using a more focused approach. Here are a couple of examples. These are concept, policy driven, quite often from senior executive management. Too many time points is both data and operations related. Clock face headways can be an issue, again driven by policy rather than planning and scheduling. This schedule, again made anonymous, is from a system who had a desire to improve their OTP, getting up to 60%. I'll say that again, getting up to 60%. In trailing buses, we found service running early, 1 or 2 minutes, past the first few time points. Operators were doing the right thing because by the middle of the route they were on time and then had to keep hustling to make it back to the transit center for the connecting pulse. I wonder how much their statistics would improve and how much lower would be the blood pressure of the operators and managers if time points followed standard industry practice, which I'll mention in a minute. I've also seen systems that made every stop a time point. One published times at the front door of an office building with another time a minute or so later at the back door. Another system had way too many stops, 1 every block. Thus, at any given minute, the same time was listed at multiple locations. Here's best practice, long established in our industry. Time point spacing about 10 minutes apart. However, we do need to consider major demand generators. I do not believe that reducing the number of time points is cheating to improve our OTP statistics. It is following best industry practice. A song first released in 1977 says, "If it don't fit, don't force it." Another line is, "Just because that's how you want it doesn't mean it will be so." Clock face headways as a policy may not be sustainable on the street. We also can't rely on history to predict the future. So clock face headways that once worked may no longer be sustainable. While NTD represents national averages, we see how overall speeds had a declining trend over 22 years. Post-COVID, I think we're probably going to see more variation in running times, not only by city and the nature of commuting, but by time of day. Perhaps we'll see less variation between peak and base because of flex time and some continued remote working. The point is ongoing vigilance and the willingness to change with conditions. One city I visited was operated by a contractor. The client, the public body, insisted on clock face headways. Riding and timing all the routes showed that wasn't possible without adding buses and hours. 4 pounds of sugar in a 3-pound bag. Watching missed connections at the transit center verified that the cycle times were insufficient. What was sacrificed? Obviously OTP, as well as time needed for operator needs, which we'll bring up in a minute or two. A stopgap until a full analysis could have been increasing cycle times, perhaps going from a 30 and 60-minute headway to a 35 and 70-minute headway. But that did not play well politically. By the way, the contractor was penalized with liquidated damages for all of the late operation, for something which, in my opinion, was out of their control. So here are the first couple of items to consider. Are the time points properly spaced? Headway math. Does a clock face headway violate headway math, and does it force a pattern of fast running, which is something that we're going to discuss shortly. Cause 2. Now we're getting into the thoughts of the planning and scheduling function, where planning and scheduling provides sustainability. We're drinking from a fire hose of information, AVLs, APCs. It's also easy to view the computer as being smarter than we are and just using that data sitting at home tight in our offices to establish the right running time. Think, though, about how our personal GPS systems have led us astray. We see the destination straight ahead while the GPS screams at us to turn left or turn right. We can use calculated interval running times, cross-referenced by OTP data. There's a risk. We may see a segment shown as 100% on time. We think the running time is accurate. However, the operators are slowing down to catch red lights, known as dragging the line, or they're building in a bit of a break en route. Conversely, we could be on time, especially with senior operators, because they know how to drive appropriately aggressively. So, to avoid responding to what only amounts to a feedback loop, we have to verify with other information. Ride the bus. If you see operators are dragging the line, working hard to catch red traffic signals, we have an indicator we have too much running time. If you see passengers holding on for dear life, then running time is short no matter what the data shows. One sanity test is to calculate the scheduled speed, miles per hour time point to time point, then compare segments with others that have similar road and other characteristics, including stop spacing. Here's something I've seen often over the years. Zeros and fives, multiples of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, 20. There's only a 10% chance that any allowed time will end in a 0, 10% that it will end in a 5, 10% that it's a 1, a 2, a 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, or 9. So not only with deadheads, but running intervals between time points. If we see a lot of 10 minutes, 15 minutes, let's take a second look. Is that accurate, or should it really be 9 minutes, 11 minutes, 13, or some different number? The mile per hour calculation is shown here. Again, made anonymous. This is a college town, so the high speed early in the morning is accurate. It's too early for other traffic. But if a similar speed were shown in the midday, we would sure have to make sure that our time is accurate. It may be an indicator that we have made a mistake somewhere. Recovery is both the shock absorber for any anomaly along the route and the operator's opportunity to take care of restroom and nutrition needs, as well as just take a breather before the next trip. The point has been argued that AVL software joined with OTP data can accurately calculate the exact amount of recovery time needed for schedule maintenance. Estimated time for operator needs can be separately identified. One system does a great job of taking that operator need even further. They've done a very thorough analysis of detailed restroom locations, factoring in even the walking distance and the number of stalls. But don't we need a guideline? Another sanity test? Just as when we go to the grocery store, we know the rough cost of an item before we look at the shelf, that sanity test does help. Another study. From the 1947 Scheduling Manual, published by the American Transit Association, predecessor to APTA, through replications and revisions, including TCRP publications, guidelines are mentioned. The guideline has changed. In the 1947 manual, it was shorter than what became the 10-minute guideline, 10% guideline rather, about 6 minutes per hour. Now I'm seeing mostly about 15% as being reasonable, about 9 minutes per operating hour. I believe increasing use of mobility devices and bike racks is a factor. We know that the event is going to happen. We don't know when, we don't know where. We can't build it into running time. It has to be built into recovery. Some will argue that standards and guidelines aren't needed. Mathematics should rule. But I believe rules of thumb give us a sense of reasonableness. Just as someone who's looked at the map first is less likely to let the mathematical GPS algorithm mislead them. The University of Southern California research noted here studied the Los Angeles MTA with a thorough statistical analysis. They determined that 15% is about right to support on-time performance. Restrooms are a significant issue. In this case, the operator had stopped mid-route at a stop often used for restroom relief. Separately, operators are also seen coming out of the McDonald's, which is behind the bus, with food, perhaps another need we should anticipate. One factor here, the bus was on its way to the end of the line about a mile or so further, which happened to be at a light rail station. Despite the millions of dollars spent on light rail stations, bus operator restrooms weren't built. Had they been built, had they been made available other than stopping mid-route, wouldn't that have been an investment with a long-term payback? As an industry, we have to consider these needs. Again, off topic, but how does the lack of restroom opportunity affect our retention of operators? How does the restroom issue impact running early? Let's just say that when you've got to get there, you get there by doing whatever you have to do. If it's also necessary to get to the end of the line because you have passengers transferring to another bus or another mode, that time that will be lost for the restroom has to come from somewhere, most likely by hot-footing it to get to the restroom location. So let's look at the second cause and the 3 R's, running time, recovery time, and restroom. Are the recovery and running times reasonable for sustainable transit operations? Have we considered the restroom issue? Consider, though, that if schedules are fixed by adding significant running time, if we discover that they are too tight now, we may not see a decline in earlies. We may see an increase in earlies. This was shown in one city where the schedules were aggressively fast and there was virtually zero recovery time. Schedules were fixed. Recovery was established. OTP did not improve. Now there were a lot of earlies. Operators had become so accustomed to driving as fast as they could that they didn't slow down. Habits are hard to break or even modify. Typically, we think of service disruptions as driving late service. But once in a catch-up mentality, a lot of folks have a hard time backing off the accelerator. In Baltimore, they were concerned about late operation, particularly on the first trip of the day. They discovered that operators were stopping for breakfast between leaving the garage and the first few time points along the route. Lateness was the issue, but that can also drive the catch-up philosophy. Once you become used to driving fast, it's very difficult to slow down. Supervision may be the key. We're talking about the causes of earlies. Let's diverge again to talk a little bit about supervisors, one of the 5 musts. In past generations, many supervisors were cops, trying to catch people doing something wrong. Certainly that's the way I was trained in the 1970s. Over the generations, that has changed, rightly so, into being coaches rather than cops. Yes, sometimes discipline is warranted, but if we do something wrong, wouldn't we rather be coached and corrected than automatically punished? Support is also essential. Over the years, I've heard many dispatchers respond to an operator's plea for help by saying, "Do the best you can." By the time they call for help, they're already doing that. That's why they asked. The supervisor, the dispatcher, the manager is supposed to know more than they do and have the big picture. In my view, that response, "Do the best you can," when they're already doing that, is disrespectful to the operator. A better response, I think, would be to let the operator know what you're doing to address the issue, or what you're going to do, or what you would like to do but you don't have the resources, but keep them informed. Dispatchers and supervisors may become overwhelmed. For that reason, I think it's good practice for management to monitor the company radio frequency. That way, if necessary, they can provide coaching to the dispatcher or supervisor. More importantly, if something major is happening, they can become aware immediately. Consider not only how supervisors are used and deployed, but how they can become problem solvers beyond today's street activity. The National Transit Institute offers a course entitled Transitioning from Frontline Employee to Frontline Supervisor. The Community Transportation Association of America has a course titled Certified Community Transit Supervisor. So help is available beyond on-the-job training. Moving up through the ranks is hard. Transitioning to supervision, particularly supervising former co-workers that remember our mistakes and misdeeds, is hard. Learning to become the coach and the cop when necessary is hard. Take advantage of any training available. Our discussion today isn't really about becoming a better manager. The courses address those skills, but we're talking about becoming street smart and schedule knowledgeable to become a problem solver. Dumbing down through the use of automation substitutes a dumb computer for an intelligent operator. Let's consider a 10-minute, 3.5-mile segment, time point to time point. The first 2.5 miles are on a high-speed roadway with few or no bus stops. The last mile is congested, many stops, maybe school zones. The device, or MDT, divides those 10 minutes into 600 seconds and does a foot-by-foot, distance-by-distance analysis. So the device, or MDT, will show the operator running early for the first part, the first 2.5 miles. That's time the operator knows he or she needs later. So the experienced operator knows that they're right, but now they still have a visual clue that they're wrong. The inexperienced director board operator may rely on the device, then not have enough time for the final mile. Here's an example of that one. Early on, we discussed the frequent service maintaining a 10-minute headway instead of a formal schedule. Here's the example of the conflict. In this case, the operator is doing a very good job of spacing. On a 10-minute headway, the difference is less than 1/2 headway variance from the leader and the follower. The device, however, shows that he or she is 11 minutes late. The passengers are happy, management is not. A man with one watch knows what time it is. A man with two watches is never sure. How do we deal with the conflicting timepieces? The clock in the dispatch office, to which operators should be setting their watches. The clock on the MDT, the clock on the AVL, the clock on this part of the bus, the clock on the radio. How do we resolve those conflicts? Secondly, one system had a time point at a hospital. Very near that hospital were 4 different bus stops. Nobody was sure which one was the time point. It was a guessing game. So perhaps the bus stop sign at the actual time point could have a device, a circle T, a star, or some other designator so that everyone, operators and passengers alike, know definitively where the real time point is. Consider 2 bus stops at an intersection that happens to be a time point, a near side stop and a far side stop. Does everyone know which one is the real time point? Now, this is listed as the final cause of earlies because running early is often perceived as all the operator's fault. Much like pilot error is often blamed for air crashes, it's an easy target. But if all the foregoing issues have been addressed, finally, operators are the ultimate drivers, pun intended, of OTP. One bus running early can cause the next bus to become later. When stop dwell time is 20 seconds plus 2.5 seconds per passenger, again going back to the Center for Urban Transit Research Publications, Journal of Public Transportation, additional passengers for the follower slow him or her down even further. Eventually, the next follower catches up. Eventually, all the horses on the merry-go-round are running nose to tail on one side of the carousel. Obviously, supervisor or dispatcher intervention is required, but remember, it started with one bus, one operator running early. That operator, that event, has a greater effect on the entire system than is sometimes considered. Do operators know what is expected of them? Do they know why? A recognition program may be an asset to raise awareness, but caution is needed to ensure that winning an OTP award does not cause forfeit of a safe driving award. Thinking back over my years as a transit manager, later as a consultant, I've found that knowledge is not only power, it leads to performance. A separate presentation and video, narrowly focused on what operators need to know about scheduling and running to schedule, is in production. I do not plan to publish it to YouTube for general distribution. I plan to make it available to transit systems. So if you think such a presentation, a video similar to this that's targeted specifically at operators in training, possibly running every once in a while on monitors in the driver's room as a reminder, if you think that would be valuable, please contact me to discuss availability and cost. The one-time cost, by the way, would include your authorization to use that tool in training and retraining in perpetuity. The person on the front lines, is often the person with the most knowledge of the problem. He or she may not know how to fix it, but they are certainly an asset in generating and evaluating ideas. Again, consider how to develop a process. Now, thank you for your time. As I mentioned earlier, both of my books are available through my website, runcutter.com. If you want to discuss my 2-day Run Cutter course, or my on-time performance workshop, or the half-day operator and retention and recruitment workshop, please email me or call me. And again, thank you for your time and for your attention.